The DNA deception, a mother's desperate choice. So picture this, eh? Your spouse dies, you're barely holding it together, and then bam, your in-laws show up with lawyers trying to steal your kid. They call you an incubator. They file fake reports saying you're unfit. They actually think you'll just hand over your baby because they demand it. What would you do? Because what I did, well, let me just say it involved a fake paternity test, a whole lot of lies, and zero regrets. Stick around, because this story gets wild. How's everyone doing today? Life throwing curveballs at ya? Grab yourself a coffee or tea, get comfy, because this one's a long ride, and trust me, you're gonna want to hear how this ends. My husband Marcus died on a Tuesday. Black ice on the highway between Calgary and Edmonton. 1 second he's driving home from a work conference, the next second some transport truck jackknifes, and that's it. Marcus was gone. Our daughter Emma was 3.5, and I was 31 years old and suddenly a widow. The first 2 weeks were a blur, honestly. I remember people bringing casseroles I couldn't eat. I remember Emma asking when Daddy was coming home, and me crying so hard I couldn't answer. I remember Marcus's parents, Gerald and Patricia Whitmore, showing up for the funeral acting all supportive, but something felt off, you know? They kept calling Emma their baby. Not their granddaughter, but their baby, like she belonged to them. Patricia took hundreds of photos of just Emma, none with me in them. She kept trying to take Emma to the bathroom alone, and Gerald literally measured Emma's height against the doorframe like he was documenting evidence or something. I was so deep in grief I didn't see what they were doing. 2 weeks after we buried Marcus, Gerald and Patricia showed up at my door with a lawyer named Douglas. He handed me custody paperwork. They were seeking full custody of Emma, claiming I was consumed by grief and unable to provide adequate care. Their proof? Photos of me crying at Superstore while Emma played games on my phone. Pictures of my messy living room, taken during the reception after Marcus's funeral, when like 50 people had just trampled through my house. A sworn statement from Patricia saying I'd abandoned Emma with them for 3 hours the day after Marcus died when I was literally at the funeral home making arrangements. They'd been building a case since the moment Marcus died. Gerald looked me dead in the eye and said, Emma belongs with blood family. You were just the incubator. Just the incubator. Patricia added that Marcus would want his daughter raised by people who truly loved him, implying I didn't. Douglas, their lawyer, said if I cooperated and signed over custody, they'd let me visit Emma once a month. Supervised. If I fought them, they'd make sure I never saw her again. They actually thought I'd just hand over my daughter. I told them to get the hell out of my house. Patricia actually smiled, and said, We've already filed with the court. Child Services will be contacting you shortly. She wasn't bluffing. Child Protective Services showed up at my door 48 hours later. Gerald and Patricia had called them, claiming I was drunk and Emma was in danger. The social worker, this woman named Jennifer who looked tired and overworked, found me stone cold sober, playing puzzles with Emma in our clean living room. But they kept calling. Every few days, another complaint. I was on drugs. Emma had bruises. Strange men were coming and going from the house. Each investigation found nothing, but it was exhausting and humiliating and terrifying. Gerald and Patricia would show up during these visits, all concerned grandparent act, offering to take Emma somewhere safe. The custody hearing was set for 6 weeks out. They hired 3 lawyers. 3. They hired a private investigator who followed me everywhere, to Tim Hortons, to Emma's daycare, to the grocery store. They showed up at Little Explorers Daycare telling the staff they were now the emergency contacts. They told our pediatrician at the Alberta Children's Hospital that I was unstable and shouldn't make medical decisions. They told our neighbors on our street in Mount Royal that they'd be moving Emma in with them soon, for her own good. And here's the thing that still makes me sick. They started redecorating Marcus's old bedroom in their house in Elbow Park. A princess room. Pink walls, canopy bed, stuffed animals everywhere. They showed people photos like it was already decided. Like Emma was already theirs. That's when I decided to fight dirty. Now, here's where I gotta ask you folks something. When someone backs you into a corner with no good options, does doing something morally questionable make you a bad person, or does it make you a survivor? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I still wrestle with this one. I started dropping hints that Marcus might not be Emma's biological father. Nothing direct at first, just little comments when Gerald and Patricia were around. Things like, I'm grateful you still want a relationship with Emma despite, well, everything. When Patricia asked what I meant, I'd change the subject real quick and look guilty. I had my best friend Rachel call Gerald pretending to be from a DNA testing company, confirming his appointment. Gerald had never made an appointment, but suddenly he became obsessed with the idea. I left a pamphlet about paternity testing on my kitchen counter when they came to drop off more legal documents. Made sure they saw me try to hide it, but not quite fast enough, you know? Patricia confronted me, demanding to know what I was hiding. I started crying, told her Marcus and I had been having problems before Emma was born, that I'd never been totally sure, that Marcus said it didn't matter because he loved Emma anyway. This was completely false. Marcus was absolutely Emma's father, and we'd been happy, really happy. But Gerald and Patricia didn't know that. They demanded a DNA test immediately. Like, they were practically salivating at the idea of proving Emma was Marcus's. I acted reluctant. Said fine, but only if they dropped the custody case. They were so confident Emma was Marcus's biological child that they agreed. Douglas, their lawyer, drew up an agreement right there. They signed it without hesitation. I scheduled the test at a clinic my friend's husband owned. Dr. Fletcher Chen ran a private medical practice in Kensington, and when I explained what Gerald and Patricia had done, the custody ambush, the false CPS reports, calling me an incubator, he was more than happy to help. The day of the test, Gerald and Patricia brought their entire family to witness what they thought would be their victory. Marcus's brother, his sister, Patricia's sister, everyone. We all gave samples. Cheek swabs. Simple enough. Fletcher rushed the results. 3 days later, we all met back at the clinic. Fletcher came into the waiting room with this serious expression, holding paperwork that looked official as hell. He delivered the news personally. Emma was definitely not biologically related to Gerald and Patricia Whitmore. The test was fake, completely fabricated. But the paperwork looked perfect. Official letterhead, lab reference numbers, technical jargon, the whole 9 yards. Gerald's face went from red to purple in about 2 seconds flat. He started screaming that I was a lying slut who'd trapped his son. Patricia made this sound like a wounded animal and lunged at me across the clinic waiting room. Fletcher stepped between us with 2 nurses, and they grabbed Patricia's arms before she could reach me. The whole family just froze. Marcus's brother covered his face. His sister stared at me like I'd just murdered someone in front of her. Gerald kept yelling about how I'd destroyed their family, stolen their grandchild through deception and lies. Security showed up and physically escorted Gerald and Patricia toward the exit while they screamed threats. Patricia was sobbing, yelling that she'd prove I faked it somehow. Gerald said I'd pay for what I'd done. Douglas, their lawyer, looked at the paperwork and told them quietly that the custody case was over. No biological connection meant no legal standing. I grabbed Emma's hand and we walked out the side door while they were still being removed from the front entrance. My hands shook so badly on the steering wheel I could barely drive. Emma sat in her car seat playing with her stuffed moose she'd named him Terry, like nothing had happened. The weight of what I'd just done hit me all at once. I had to pull over in a Canadian Tire parking lot because I couldn't see through the tears. Emma asked why Nana and Papa were yelling so loud. I wiped my eyes and told her they were upset about grown-up stuff. She accepted that and went back to playing with Terry. I called my lawyer, Montgomery, from the car. He answered on the second ring, and I told him everything. He said he'd review the paperwork Gerald and Patricia had signed before the test, the agreement that they'd drop all custody claims if DNA proved no biological relation. Montgomery called back an hour later. The agreement was ironclad. Their signatures were right there. Douglas had witnessed it. The custody case was officially over. But Montgomery warned me they'd probably try other harassment tactics. Suggested documenting everything, being prepared to file for a restraining order. That night, I held Emma while she slept in her little bed with the unicorn sheets. She looked so peaceful. I'd just erased Marcus's parents from her life with a lie. There was no taking it back. But the alternative was losing her to people who called me an incubator and saw her as property. I kissed her forehead and told myself I did what I had to do. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. The next morning, Patricia called 47 times before I finally blocked her number around 8. I listened to a few voicemails. They ranged from begging to see Emma, to threatening legal action, to calling me every horrible name she could think of. Gerald started texting. Each message called me something vile and promised I'd pay for my deception. He said I'd destroyed their family, stolen their only connection to their dead son. I saved all the messages in a folder and blocked his number too. Rachel came over around 10 after I called her, sobbing. I confessed everything about the fake DNA test while Emma watched Paw Patrol in the other room. Rachel held me while I broke down. She pulled back, looked me right in the eyes, and said, "You did what you had to do to protect your daughter from people trying to steal her." She reminded me how Gerald and Patricia had been calculating and cruel from the moment Marcus died. The photos, the false CPS reports, the 3 lawyers. 2 days later, Gerald and Patricia showed up at my house pounding on the door, demanding I admit the test was fake. I stood inside with the door locked and recorded everything on my phone. They screamed for 10 minutes before I called the cops. Calgary Police Service showed up within 15 minutes and removed them for trespassing. Montgomery filed for a restraining order the next day. Used all the harassment evidence, the false CPS reports, threatening voicemails and texts, the trespassing incident. The court granted a temporary order requiring Gerald and Patricia to stay 500 feet away from me, Emma, our home, and her daycare. The hearing for a permanent restraining order was scheduled 3 weeks out. Here's my second question for y'all. Do you think there's ever a situation where lying is the right thing to do? When protecting someone you love means crossing ethical lines? Where's the boundary? Let me know what you think. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Valerie Morrison the following week. She specialized in grief counseling and trauma. I told her everything, Marcus dying, Gerald and Patricia trying to take Emma, the fake DNA test. Valerie listened without judging. Then she helped me understand I'd been backed into an impossible corner by people who exploited my vulnerability. She said the deception was survival, not malice, even though the moral weight still felt heavy. We talked about grief and protection and what it means to be a good mother when there are no good choices. Gerald and Patricia tried to get Fletcher's clinic to hand over the actual lab documentation. Fletcher had prepared everything perfectly. Fake paperwork that looked completely legitimate with proper letterhead, technical details, reference numbers. Patricia threatened to sue. Her lawyer reviewed everything and told her there was no legal basis. The test results appeared valid and properly documented. Marcus's brother Connor called me 3 days after the DNA test blew up. Connor hadn't called since the funeral, hadn't responded to any messages about the custody battle. His voice came through broken and shaky. Nothing like the confident guy who used to chirp Marcus at family dinners about the Flames versus the Oilers. He said he just found out about everything, the custody papers, the lawyers, all the false CPS reports. He'd been working up in Fort McMurray on an oil rig and only got back when the DNA results exploded the family. He asked if there was any way he could still see Emma, still be her uncle, despite what his parents did. I told him I needed time to think about it. I met Connor at a coffee shop in Inglewood the next morning. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, hair all messed up. He started talking before I even ordered my drink. He said his parents had become obsessed with Emma after Marcus died, calling her their second chance, saying she was all they had left. He admitted they'd always been controlling growing up, but this was different. Darker. He looked genuinely sick when he talked about the false CPS reports. Connor leaned forward and told me what his parents were saying now. They'd convinced themselves I must have switched the DNA samples somehow, or paid Fletcher to fake the results. They sounded completely unhinged, repeating the same accusations over and over. Part of me felt scared hearing this. Another part felt relieved because the more insane they sounded, the less likely anyone would believe them. The daycare director called me 2 days later sounding really upset. Patricia had shown up that morning trying to pick up Emma, even though I'd removed her from the emergency contact list weeks ago. Security stopped her at the front door, but she started screaming that her granddaughter was being kept from her, that she had rights. She caused such a scene that other parents complained. They called Calgary police, who banned her from the property completely. The director said if Patricia showed up again, they'd press charges for trespassing. Jennifer from CPS showed up for what she said would be her final visit the following week. She looked through the house one more time, played with Emma for a few minutes, then sat down with me at the kitchen table. She apologized for everything I'd been put through. Said her report would note that all complaints were clearly malicious and totally unfounded. She'd seen cases like this before, grandparents weaponizing the system during custody fights. She officially closed the case. Unless new credible concerns came up, they wouldn't be back. I almost cried with relief. The permanent restraining order hearing finally arrived 3 weeks after the temporary one was granted. I brought a thick folder of evidence: harassment, threatening voicemails and texts, trespassing, the daycare scene. Gerald and Patricia showed up with yet another lawyer who argued they were just grieving grandparents being denied access. The judge read through everything with his mouth pressed into a thin line. He looked at Gerald and Patricia and asked if they understood how serious it was to file false reports with child services. Their lawyer tried to argue they'd had legitimate concerns, but the judge cut him off. He granted the permanent restraining order for 3 years. They couldn't contact us directly or through other people. If they violated it even once, they'd face criminal charges. Connor called after the hearing and asked about maintaining a relationship with Emma separate from his parents. I was hesitant, but Connor had been consistently respectful and genuinely horrified by everything they'd done. We agreed he could visit at my house with me present, supervised visits where he could be her uncle without any toxic grandparent stuff. He seemed relieved and grateful, promised he'd never pass information to his parents. Last question, folks. When family becomes toxic, is it okay to completely cut them off? Even if they're grieving too? Even if they're blood? This one keeps me up at night, so I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. For weeks after, I'd see silver SUVs that looked like Gerald and Patricia's Lexus everywhere. Each time my heart would race and my palms would sweat until I could confirm it wasn't actually them. Emma brought up Nana and Papa one evening while we were eating craft dinner. She asked when she'd see them again in this casual way, like she was asking about any normal relatives. I told her they were taking a very long break because of grown-up problems, nothing she did wrong. She nodded and accepted this without follow-up questions, then immediately started talking about the art project she was making at daycare with glitter and popsicle sticks. Rachel came over the following weekend with boxes of security cameras she'd ordered off Amazon. We spent hours installing them around my house in Marta Loop, mounting them under the eaves, connecting them to Wi-Fi. The footage saved automatically to cloud storage, and I could monitor everything from an app on my phone. Just having the cameras made me feel more secure. We also changed all the locks and installed a deadbolt on Emma's bedroom door. Extra security measures that felt necessary. 3 months after the fake DNA test, I woke up one morning and realized I could breathe normally again. The constant fear and hypervigilance were fading into something more manageable. Emma was thriving at Little Explorers, making friends and learning songs she'd sing constantly at home. Her teacher reported she was socially well-adjusted with no signs of trauma or behavioral issues. My sleep improved. I stopped having nightmares about custody hearings and CPS investigations. Life was starting to feel almost normal. Connor started visiting every other weekend, bringing age-appropriate gifts like coloring books and stuffed animals. He'd sit on the floor with Emma building Lego towers and playing pretend games. He never mentioned Gerald and Patricia, or asked questions designed to gather information. He just genuinely enjoyed spending time with his niece. Watching them together made me grateful that Emma could maintain some connection to Marcus's family through someone healthy and respectful. Connor looked so much like Marcus that sometimes it hurt to watch him. But it also felt good to see family resemblance in someone who wasn't trying to hurt us. Dr. Valerie helped me work through the complicated grief of losing Marcus while simultaneously fighting his parents. I explained that I couldn't properly mourn my husband because I'd been in survival mode. The grief and the battle had gotten tangled together. Now that things had calmed down, the grief was hitting me in waves mixed with anger at Gerald and Patricia for corrupting even my memories of Marcus. I couldn't think about our wedding without remembering how his parents tried to control every detail. I couldn't look at photos of Marcus holding baby Emma without thinking about how they tried to take her. Valerie helped me create separate spaces in my mind for grieving Marcus versus processing what his parents had done. She reminded me that Marcus would have been horrified by their actions, that he would have protected Emma just like I did. That helped. Imagining him standing beside me against them. 4 months after the fake DNA test, Emma mentioned Nana and Papa only occasionally, without any distress. She'd see an older couple at Safeway and comment that they looked like grandparents, or she'd remember something they'd given her. But it was casual observation rather than grief. She'd formed much closer bonds with Rachel, who took her for special auntie-niece days at the Calgary Zoo or Telus Spark. Connor's regular visits gave her consistent connection to Marcus's side of the family through someone stable and kind. My parents had stepped up too, driving in from Lethbridge every few weeks to spend weekends with us. The family structure around Emma looked completely different than it would have with Gerald and Patricia, but it was healthier based on actual love instead of possession and control. Watching her thrive eased some of my guilt about the deception. The mail came on a Tuesday afternoon while Emma was at daycare. Official envelope from a law firm 2 provinces away, British Columbia. Victoria? Specifically. Gerald and Patricia were moving. The notice was brief, just informing me of their address change for legal purposes related to the restraining order. Connor called that evening. Said his parents had put their house on the market 3 weeks ago without telling anyone. They'd been packing in secret. Patricia had been telling friends they couldn't bear to live in the same city where Marcus died, that it hurt too much to see places he used to go. Gerald told neighbors they needed a fresh start. But the real story was they'd signed a lease on a condo in a retirement community near the ocean, gated, with security. 2,000 kilometers away. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for months. 2,000 kilometers between them and Emma felt like a gift. 3 weeks after the moving notice, Montgomery called. He'd received a letter from Patricia's new lawyer. She was offering to drop all hostility if I would admit the DNA test was fabricated and allow supervised monthly visits with Emma. The lawyer's language was careful, but the desperation underneath was obvious. Patricia wanted validation that she was right, that Emma was their biological grandchild, that I had lied. Montgomery had already drafted a response. Brief and firm. I had nothing to admit. The DNA test results stood as documented. The restraining order remained in full effect. He said Patricia's offer was a trap. Any admission could potentially be used to reopen legal proceedings or file criminal charges for fraud. I signed off on Montgomery's response. Part of me felt sorry for Patricia in a distant way. She was clearly broken by losing Marcus and then losing access to Emma, but I couldn't risk Emma's safety for Patricia's peace of mind. I started seeing someone new about 6 months after Marcus died. His name was Liam. We met through a mutual friend, and he was patient with my complicated situation. He understood I had a daughter and a dead husband and crazy in-laws with restraining orders. We took things slowly. His steady presence felt like possibility after months of pure survival mode. Emma started kindergarten that fall at a school in our neighborhood. The principal took security concerns seriously. I provided full documentation of the restraining order. They added Gerald and Patricia's names to the banned persons list, flagged Emma's file with security alerts. The security measures felt automatic now, just part of our life structure. Connor got engaged to his girlfriend Stephanie, and he asked if Emma could be flower girl at their wedding. The wedding would be in Canmore, and Connor made it explicitly clear that Gerald and Patricia would not be invited. He'd hired security guards for the venue, provided photos of them to all staff. Looking at his earnest face, I realized he'd earned my trust. I agreed. Nearly a year had passed since Marcus died when Emma and I visited his grave at Queen's Park Cemetery on a Sunday afternoon in November. Emma had picked wildflowers that morning and carried them carefully. We walked to his headstone, and Emma placed the flowers at the base while I stood behind her with my hand on her shoulder. She told Daddy about kindergarten and her teacher and her new friend Olivia. She told him about Uncle Connor's wedding and how she got to throw flower petals. Then she mentioned Mama's friend Liam, who taught her to draw elephants. I knelt down and told Marcus silently that I'd protected our daughter the only way I could when his parents tried to take her. That I hoped he understood. That Emma was safe and loved and thriving. Then we sat quietly for a few minutes before Emma asked if we could get Timbits. Life continued forward, even while we honored what was lost. The restraining order still had 2.5 years remaining, but I'd already started planning to renew it. Montgomery explained the process. Given Gerald and Patricia's documented behavior, renewal would be straightforward. Their current silence and distance might mean they'd accepted defeat, or it might mean they were biding their time. I couldn't know which, and I refused to risk Emma's safety on assumptions. I kept copies of all documentation in a fireproof safe, the restraining order paperwork, the fake DNA test results, records of every false CPS report, transcripts from the custody hearing. If they tried anything when the current order expired, I'd have an airtight case. Some nights I wondered if I was being paranoid, but then I'd remember Gerald calling me an incubator and Patricia's systematic campaign to paint me as unfit. Better paranoid and protected than trusting and vulnerable. 8 months after the custody battle officially ended, most days I could look at myself in the mirror without feeling like a liar. The deception sat in my chest like a stone, but Emma was safe, and that mattered more than my conscience. Gerald and Patricia had forced my hand by treating my grief like weakness, and my daughter like property. I'd protected her the only way they left available. Watching her thrive made the moral weight bearable, even if it never fully disappeared. Some nights I still woke up thinking about what I'd done, but then I'd check on Emma, sleeping peacefully with Terry, the moose tucked under her arm, and remember why I'd crossed that line. She was mine to protect, and I'd make the same choice again if I had to. The guilt was real and heavy, but so was the knowledge that Emma was safe and thriving, because I'd been willing to do whatever it took. Liam came over for dinner on a Saturday night, and he and Emma worked on art projects at the kitchen table while I cleaned dishes. He never tried to act like her father or replace Marcus. He just treated her with genuine affection and respect. Watching them laugh together over a drawing of a purple moose made something in my chest unclench. Maybe there was space in our lives for more than just survival and protection. Maybe we could actually build something good. Connor's wedding took place on a Saturday in October at a venue in Canmore with the mountains as backdrop. Emma wore a white dress with pink flowers and took her flower girl duties very seriously. Gerald and Patricia weren't there, as promised. Security had their photos. The wedding was beautiful and normal and joyful. Watching Connor get married felt like reclaiming Marcus's family legacy from the toxic elements that had tried to corrupt it. Nearly a year had passed since Marcus died, and I was genuinely happy now in ways that seemed impossible during those first devastating weeks. Emma was thriving in kindergarten with friends and confidence and healthy ways of talking about daddy. We had a family structure built on love instead of possession, Rachel and Connor and Liam and my parents forming a support system that felt solid. Legal barriers and geographic distance kept us protected from Gerald and Patricia, who lived 2,000 kilometers away, convinced of delusions they'd never let go. The fake DNA test remained my secret burden and protection, sitting in my chest like a stone I'd learned to carry. It was morally complicated and ethically messy, but absolutely effective. We were safe. We were healing. We were building a future that honored Marcus's memory without being destroyed by his parents' dysfunction. Some mornings, I woke up and felt actual joy, instead of just relief at surviving another day. Emma would climb into my bed and tell me about her dreams, and I'd make pancakes while she colored at the kitchen table. Normal life had returned in ways I'd thought were lost forever when Marcus died. The grief remained, but it didn't consume everything anymore. There was room for happiness alongside the loss, and that felt like its own kind of victory. So that's my story, folks. A widow who lied her way to protecting her daughter. Was it right? Was it wrong? Honestly, I still don't know. But Emma's safe, and that's what matters. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking with me. Drop a comment and let me know what you would have done in my shoes. And hey, if you've got your own crazy in-law stories, I'd love to hear them. Until next time, take care of yourselves, eh?